Hi, and in this video I'd like to talk about the guild Serenity, which might sound strange. What has just happened at the time I'm doing this is Mythic Gul'dan has been killed, and it is the Russian guild Exorcist that has got the world first. We don't yet know who's coming second or third, or at least at the time I'm doing this. Maybe someone's killing it right at the same time. But you would presume it's between either Serenity or Method. Now, this was a little bit of a surprise to me. You can never tell for certain, of course, but Serenity were very much leading the way through Mythic Nighthold and going for their first, world first, well, ever, I suppose, but certainly for those players in Legion, because a lot of those players had come from the guild Method at the end of Warlords of Draenor. So what I want to ask is, what were their objectives for actually leaving, and are they succeeding? Now, to do this, first of all, what I want to do is do a little bit of a history lesson in terms of going right back several years to when Method first came to prominence. Now, the first tier where they were really going for it was tier 11, right at the start of Cataclysm. I wasn't actually playing at the time. I was taking a very long break because I'd got annoyed with, would you believe it, I'd got annoyed with World of Warcraft in Wrath, but it was in the first tier where it was all complete dog shit. So, tier 11, the final boss to be killed was Alakir. World first in that case was Paragon, followed by Method. Then came tier 12, Ragnaros Mark II. World first, Paragon, a Finnish guild. Second, Method. Tier 3, the madness of Deathwing, and it was complete madness. In terms of what we might have thought was the established order at the time, I'd come back at this point, and just chaos was sown to the wind. So the world first guild was a Korean guild, the second was a Taiwanese guild, the third was a Korean guild. The fourth was a US guild, Blood Legion, and then it was Paragon followed by Method. So neither of them were really in the world first race at all properly. But again, Paragon were coming ahead of Method. And it's quite impressive when you think about it, because Method are an EU-based guild, but they're a primarily English-speaking guild, so they've got a very large pool of potential players there, because they can cover players from lots and lots of countries as long as they're fluent in English. Paragon raid in Finnish. It's a Finnish guild, so they pretty much, well, they do only take players who can speak fluent Finnish. And there's not many players outside of Finland or who grew up outside of Finland would be able to do that. And it massively limits their pool of potential players. Now, why should this be a big thing? Well, it's because, of course, especially with world first progress, it's very intense. It's consuming your whole life. And you can easily get burned out. Players may not be able to continue because, you know, they might have to realise they have to get on with some real life. They have to get on with a career or family or something like that. So they're going to lose players now and then, and getting them to that same standard and commitment levels, very difficult with such a small pool. So when I was coming back at this point, and because I'd, never heard of Paragon when I left, I'm not even sure they were about, and I thought this was very, very impressive. But then we went into MOP, and there was no world race in MOP, because the 10-man and 25-man of the hard mode, which was heroic at the time, the higher number of players, the 25-man, was always more difficult in Wrath. But in MOP, they tried to make it the same. They tried to give equal difficulty for 10 and 25 man. Didn't always work very well. I mean, there were some bosses where it was always going to be easier on 10 man. There were some bosses where it would potentially be easier on 25 man. Obviously, the difficulty of organising a 25 man raid was much greater than, say, a 10 man raid. So a lot of the more casual guilds tend to go 10 man. But ultimately, what happened is Paragon went 10 man, Method went 25 man. And you can understand with Paragon, because having such a small pool of players, the 10-man is an obvious draw for them. But what it meant was, all the way through MOP, there was no world race at all. Paragon always got to first for the 10-man. Method always got to first for the 25-man. There was no point in comparing between each other, because, although Blizzard had tried their best and done a reasonably good job, as far as can be expected, to make them both equally challenging, you sort of know they're not really. There's always going to be one that's a little bit easier than the other. So comparing dates between them, pointless. So then in Warlords of Draenor, Blizzard realised that actually it was limiting their ability to make interesting fights, having two different sizes for the same difficulty. So they went, no, we need one size, and they went 20 man. So Paragon then had to go 20 man method, of course. Went 20 man as well. And then tier 17, and there were two raids in tier 17. There was High Maul first of all. And the first guild that got Margok was Paragon. This was not a surprise to anyone. Paragon had always finished above Method. And when they were directly competing, they were the guys, apart from Madness of Deathwing there, that were getting those world firsts. So everyone just thought, Method, you're good, mates, but, you're not quite in their league. And then Blackrock Foundry came out. And Method got the world first on Mythic, Blackhand. Well, this surprised a lot of people because now the established order was upset a little bit. Well, hang on a minute, Method have beat Paragon for the first time ever. Now there was a race because for Margok, you could actually look back at it and say, well, there was a race for Margok. But people didn't see it that way. They thought Paragon would get it first, and Paragon did get it first. So it sort of reinforces in your own head that there is no real race. But as soon as Method killed Blackhand, all of a sudden, game on. So for Hellfire Citadel, it was like, okay, could be either. Could be either here. So you sort of felt there was an actual race, even though it was only a 2-horse race. And Method got Mythic Archimond. With Exorcist coming third, really starting to establish themselves there, then something very interesting happened. In fact, two stunningly interesting things happened that completely rocked the world order in raiding World of Warcraft. Paragon announced that they were stopping. It was too much to try and get enough players of the right quality that spoke Finnish. And you can well understand that. I take my hat off to them. They are the most impressive. There are many impressive guilds in the history of World of Warcraft, of course. But surely the ones who limit their pool like that, whether you say it's a good idea to do that or not is another matter, but limiting that potential pool of players and being able to do what they did, being so dominant, is, in my mind, a massively impressive feat of organisation. But this laid the way for Method. Everyone just thought, well, we're back to no race. It's going to be Method all the way through the next expansion. And then Method split. And this is where we enter the sort of world of perceptions. Now, I was not an avid follower of them. So to begin with, I didn't really know what was going on. I sort of now understand some reasons. And I would actually support the reasons why the Serenity players, as they became, went and formed that new guild. But at the time, I saw it as there was obviously a core of players who thought, you know what, we can do this better. We don't like the current leadership. We're going to form our own guild. This has happened. It's not quite what happened there. I'll go on to what actually happened as far as I can tell after this. But this sort of thing happens all the time. I'm sure many of us will have experienced this. I have certainly experienced it. In fact, when I first started raiding in Vanilla, my first proper raid guild, they had endured splits twice. The first time was before I joined them. And I always think the name's very curious because there are different reasons for forming your own guild. Sometimes you just get a group of players who've maybe taken a break and coming back and, okay, well, the same group of players playing together, we might as well form our own guild. Or some players just start playing it and decide to form their own guild. Or some players are in a guild that collapses and there's enough of a core of them to go, okay, well, we'll form our own guild. Those sort of reasons, and you come up with usually a stupid name for your guild. But sometimes a core leave the guild and want to form their own because they think they can do it better. And there's always, the name of the guild is always politically charged to because I can't think of a better term to use at the moment. It's always very meaningful because they're trying to ascribe some valor to what they're doing, because ultimately a guild split is a betrayal. Now, I don't want to lay it on too thick. This is a game. We're not screwing with people's lives or families or homes or jobs or anything. Nothing that's really super important. But within the game, it is a sort of betrayal because you're leaving a load of people in the dust. And often when you're doing this, you don't discuss this openly. This is all very much behind the shadows, in whispers and things like that. So there is that sort of underhand aspect to it. So usually the name is something that sort of gives it a bit of honour back. And going back to the guild I first joined, they'd had some players that left. They thought they could do better. Now, to be fair to them, they did very, very well. And they did become one of the top. And then I actually joined them a couple of years later, and then while I was with them, they did become the top guild on the realm as well. So they certainly succeeded. But I always found it curious the name they chose. They chose Semper Fidelis. And it's an absolutely great guild. I loved my time in that guild. But Semper Fidelis is Latin for always faithful. I thought this is a strange name to give a guild that's just split from another, because that's very much the opposite. But then it happened again. In fact, the people who did that eventually got kicked out of that guild because they were arseholes, basically. And they ended up coming back. The guild leader of the guild that I was in, that they'd originally split from. It's all getting very confusing. Sorry about this. They came back, but they started being arseholes again. They sort of wanted control back of this guild. And no one was having any of it because they were dicks. But they had enough influence on some others. And there was this... Basically, the long and short of it is I woke up one Sunday and half the guild was gone. So they'd done the same thing that they'd done some months before. They'd gone, we can do it better. This guild is not going to progress very fast. You're really good players. Lay on the flattery. And a lot of them were, by the way. We're going to go and do great things. So yeah, that snookered our Ragnaros progress for a bit while we restocked up on people. But it was a lot easier to recruit then. Although you didn't have logs to see how good they were, and you just had to trial them. But anyway, they gave themselves a name, again, to try and put some honour into this. And they wanted to call themselves Phoenix Rising. And you can sort of see where this is coming from. Phoenix Rising from the ashes. Our guild was the ashes. It was failure. And they were going to be this great and glorious guild. The crystallisation of all that's best about it. And off they go. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to them at the time, when it came to making their guild, they couldn't call themselves Phoenix Rising because there was already a Phoenix Rising guild. But on We Were Alliance, there was a Horde guild called Phoenix Rising. They didn't know about this. So there's a bit of a cock-up with marketing there. But they were insistent on calling themselves Phoenix Rising, so they called themselves PR instead. Now, this time they failed abysmally, ultimately because their leadership was shit. And ever after, we sort of helpfully suggested to them that maybe that PR instead could stand for Project Retard. Just to underline the bad feeling that can exist when you get a split like this. And many of those players ended up just stopped playing the game. They didn't try and get back into other guilds or anything like that. They just, they'd failed and they just stopped playing, which was a damn shame because some of them were really good and nice people. And you've seen this happen as well, and I would say, this is my personal experience, it's purely anecdotal, there's no facts behind this, but when you get a guild split, most of the time it does fail, and I think it probably fails because a lot of the time the people who do this and try and orchestrate this think that they're better than they are. They think they can do a better job, and then don't. But sometimes it does succeed. So what happened with the Serenity split was, so I just perceived it to be, there's a lot of play, maybe some of the leadership are not brilliant players. Maybe they felt they were carrying them a little bit. Sure, they were getting their world first, but, maybe they saw guilds like Exorcist coming up on their heels and thought, we're not guaranteed, just because Paragons have gone does not mean we're guaranteed to be getting world first in the next expansion, Legion. We need to strengthen, so they left for that reason. Wasn't quite as simple as that. What ultimately it was about was that these guys that left to form Serenity were World of Warcraft raiders. That's what they were. But Method, as they pointed out, was an organisation. It wasn't a guild. The Method guild that we know about was just the World of Warcraft branch of a larger organisation with a management that was very much focused on making money. And it was suggested that Method sort of stated that they saw themselves as a streaming organisation, and making money that way, with SCO being the sort of raiding, the World of Warcraft raider part of that management. So they sort of had some disagreements with that, and they wanted to focus more on the raiding, is how I sort of see it since in terms of what was said. So, and that's the reason why I wanted to form this other guild, which actually is fair enough. So, they sort of felt they were part of this corporate machine, and that's not what they wanted to be. They're just wanting to play World of Warcraft and get these world firsts, and they sort of saw that as a drag. So they left and joined another guild so they could focus on it. Because I thought at the time, curious choice of name, Serenity. Now, how they described it later is they had a discussion, lots of people shouting names, and Serenity seemed to be the one that stuck out. I'm not quite sure I believe exactly that. I think the reason it may have stuck out is you can imagine, again, the name is always, you always choose a name that's very much the opposite of where you perceive the problems were to begin with. So you can very much imagine that there were a lot of arguments amongst players in the final days of Method as it was. And Serenity, well, Serenity very much the implication that everyone that's in this guild now is all singing off the same hymn sheet. We all want the same things. We're all in tune, all in harmony with each other. And I think that's probably where it comes from. But the perception still stuck. The perception was still one of the people who went to join Serenity with the real World of Warcraft raiders, the real good players there. What was left behind at Method were just these corporate guys who would probably just go and focus on something else. Well, as it turns out, not a bit of it. The Method Guild still carried on. They recruited. But a lot of people were expecting when Legion came out, Serenity would lead the way because these were this focused group now. It's like imagine Method, but super focused just on the World of Warcraft race. Because that's what people were thinking was going to happen. And then, so tier 19, first raid, Emerald Nightmare. Mythic Xavius, first guild to kill it, Exorcus. Wow, their first world first. The first time anyone had got a world first for years that wasn't Method or Paragon. And then Method got the second kill, ahead of Serenity. Whoa, what's going on here? This is not part of the script. Method, this husk of a guild that was supposed to basically just become now, with no disrespect, a Nihilum type guild, one that had been great, formerly great, but now a lot of their best players had gone and they were just going to maybe still be a good guild because they still, they can still raid all day and you can still prepare really well, but they're not quite going to be up there, are they? They're not going to be there because they've lost the real guys. Well, they've come second and ahead of Serenity. And then Trial of Valor came out with an extremely tough Mythic Hellier, a very, very worthy boss for guilds of this caliber, because Mythic Xavius has been a bit of a damp squib. So Mythic Hellier, for us mere mortals, it was horrifying, terrifying in its original form before they heavily nerfed it. But for these guys, it must have been, wow, this is a real test. And then the world first went to Method. And this had nothing to do with the bans, by the way, because Method and Serenity both killed it before any of the other guilds that got banned killed it with their supposed exploits. So they very much got it first. But again, Method got the first ahead of Serenity. So Serenity, and I thought a lot of people had to reevaluate things because this guild that was supposed to be now leading the way, was supposed to be like Method on crack, it's not only that it's not getting world first, it hasn't got a world first as Serenity yet. And it's not going to before Tomb of Sargeras at least. Now that we know Exorcers have got Gul'dan. But they weren't even able to beat Method, the guild they left behind as this corporate machine that wasn't really all that focused on the progress. And I don't know anything intimately about these players. And I don't know anything really. I'm just speculating. And I certainly wouldn't want to say anything out of turn with any of these players because, as I've said, I totally understand why the guys from Serenity went and formed their own guild because, I now sort of see that, I'd probably have been one of those players that left as well. Just for the point of view of getting, I wouldn't like to feel part of a corporate machine within a game that I play. And got to remember, these guys are basically giving up things to play this game. I mean, whether you think that's a good or a bad thing, I mean, I think they're mental. But, they're potentially giving up good careers and stuff like that because you can't duel a good career with this unless your career is this. As I say, it is for the management of Method. They're making their revenue from it. So I wouldn't have liked that myself, just feeling, feeling that I was oiling the wheels of this machine, by playing a game and giving up my life to do so. Do you think they'd be reevaluating things now? Obviously, at the moment, they'll be very much focused on at least trying to beat Method this time on Gul'dan. They're not getting the world first. Their stated intention, by the way, was to get world first. Even when they came out and explained their reasons for making the split, they did clearly state that their intentions was not just so they could enjoy the game more and see what happened. They were very much focused, like, we're getting world first. And that hasn't happened. That part has failed. And I just wonder if maybe after Gul'dan, you've killed Gul'dan, they're going to have to go back and think, right, what has gone wrong here and what do we need to do? Because this must be hurting them. This must be hurting them a lot because they've left for idealistic reasons. And the sort of the evil corporate machine that they've left is beating them. Now, it may not on Gul'dan. It may well be that Serenity beat Method on Gul'dan, and that will maybe ease the pain, but they're still not getting the world first that those players were used to getting with Method. And again, people may start to ask the question, well, if you'd have stayed with Method, maybe you would have been getting world first because because maybe the people who've left and formed Serenity don't quite have all of the leadership skills necessary to get those world first because somehow Method are still managing to beat them. They just got different players. And how shit must that make the players who formed Serenity feel? The fact that Method just went, oh, okay, you're off, bye, we'll just get some more people and beat you. And that's exactly what's been happening. But anyway, those are sort of my sort of rambling comments on it, as well as anyone who hasn't necessarily followed World Race for a while. Hopefully you've sort of seen a little bit of context about where all this is. Hope you found it interesting as always. And if you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share. And until next time, I'll see you later.